Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for November's edition of Inside Immigration. Today, we're joined by partner Ravi Jain and Permanent Residence Practice Director Khalid Stein. Please feel free to ask any questions through the pop-up text bar on your screen. If the panelists do not get to your question, you can contact them through the contact information provided on screen, or also by reaching out to me directly at info@gons.com. And with that being said, I'll hand things over to our panelists.
Great, thank you, Stephen. So I guess I'm starting, and I'm just going to give a bit of an update on some of the government meetings. So twice a year, the leaders of the Canadian Bar Association Immigration Section meet with various government agencies. So we meet with, the Canada Border Services Agency, the Department of Labor, or Service Canada, or ESDC. We meet with, actually we're meeting with the Immigration Department, IRCC, quite regularly. It was actually weekly when the pandemic broke, and then it moved to to bi-weekly and then monthly. But we're monthly now, but typically before the pandemic it was biannually. So the last meeting we had was with the and then also we meet with ministerial level, meetings. So there's the meetings with the immigration minister, Mr. Mendocino, just happened on November 23rd with his office, and then we're going to be meeting with the Minister of Public Safety, Mr. Blair, which I set up that meeting. That's going to be next week. So I'll just give you a bit of an overview. With Mr. Mendocino's office, talked about the levels plan, and we talked about how they're going to fulfill their ambitious plan to bring in a lot of immigrants going forward. So we talked about some options. We could land those who are already approved for permanent residence with expired or valid approvals, confirmations of permanent resident visas. We could finalize the processing of a lot of people that are sort of in the queue that are waiting. We could draw more upon the pool of applicants. So temporary residents who are here, for instance, in Canada and already integrated. And we also talked about the need for more digitization. I think a lot of people, a lot of the lay sort of public, even some immigration lawyers just think that the government can just snap its fingers and all of a sudden they're digitizing a form that wasn't digitized before, but it is a lot more complicated than that. And there are major implications when they do that. So we know that citizenship, PR cards, those kinds of things, spousal sponsorships could be digitized, and they are moving in that direction. We talked about the home support worker program, but there was a lot of frustration because there's a 2750 cap on each of the two programs for the caregivers. And one of them was just reached without notice. And so we said, look, is there any way we can get like an update so people can have a sense of when the cap's about to be reached? And they said the issue with that is that they're paper-based applications, again, and they are looking to digitize those too, but the problem is they couldn't even get into the mail rooms. So they didn't know where the applications were in terms of the cap, and until it was sort of too late. So I think that digitizing will sort of solve that problem eventually. We talked about consultants. So there are immigration consultants who are authorized to practice law. The Canadian Bar Association has passed a resolution across the entire organization. So it's 36,000 lawyers, judges, and academics, stating that they should not be able to practice law. The track record has been horrific. The educational standards are not there. The competency, the discipline of the two regulatory bodies that have taken place so far have been a major failure. There have been governance issues with respect to the regulators themselves, and there's been huge exposés, across major, newspapers like the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, and others that have exposed major problems with fraud and incompetence. So they are nevertheless proceeding with this new third attempt at regulating them, and they haven't yet drafted the regulations to those, and so we're going to be active as the Canadian Bar Association on commenting on grandparenting. So in other words, those who are existing consultants, if they get rolled into the new regulator, our concern is that we're just sort of grandparenting the problem, right? It's just the same problem's gonna stick because there's like 7,000 now, whereas before there were just 1,600 under the first regulator. So a big upswing in under this government, and that's a big problem. But the government wants to give them a chance and try yet a third attempt at regulation. And I think if this one fails, then I think that'll be the end of it. We also talked about the Queen's course for new consultants and kind of dangerous messaging, because a lot of the people we see, certainly in my practice, think that they've hired an immigration lawyer when in fact they've hired a consultant. And I think that misperception will get worse because people will take the Queen's course and it's administered by the Faculty of Law, although the diploma is issued by Queen's University. And some of the graduates say, oh, I went to Queen's Law School, and that's misleading because it's just an online surface course. It's not equivalent at all to a law degree. Also, we talked about the orders in council. You know, and I'll just comment briefly on that. There's a new one with respect to the United States. Typically, the US one lasts 3 weeks, and the other orders in council relating to the rest of the world and the quarantine requirements last 4 weeks. That's because, you know, they're keen to get rid of the US travel ban as quickly as possible because, you know, it's the largest undefended border in the world. We have extensive trade relationship. You know, so I think that's why it's always like 3 weeks. But you know, the US isn't doing so well right now, obviously, and of course we're spiking as well. So, you know, I don't really anticipate a change until probably we get a vaccine. In terms of the quarantine one, you know, that one is sort of self-amending. Just a couple comments. Obviously, midway through, since March, they started saying you have to wear masks. Then, you know, there are sections that comes up every once in a while about whether people who are supposed to be quarantining, can they leave the country if they just want to, you know, not quarantine anymore, but they actually want to leave Canada? And the answer is yes, actually they can. There are other sections too, covering the Calgary pilot project, which allows people to come into Calgary at the Landor airport there and avoid the 14-day quarantine if they test negative upon entry, and then 6 to 7 days later go to an approved pharmacy for a second test. So I'm going to be raising that issue with Minister Blair's office in public safety and with CBSA later today. This afternoon we have a call with them, the senior civil servants, and I want to just get a sense of whether we can roll that out, because it looks like Canada's going to be, unfortunately, slower than some other countries because we're not producing, don't have manufacturing capacity, and I guess no one turned their minds to that earlier. So also we talked about spousal processing and the fact that, you know, there's a one-touch policy, so a lot of people's applications get returned for being incomplete when there's minor discrepancies. So again, another reason to sort of hire professionals to make sure that doesn't happen to you, because that can have implications to your implied status, you know, your ability to keep working. It's really can be quite significant. So that's one way that I think, you know, we've helped a lot of people by just ensuring things are done properly. I also chaired a meeting with the Department of Labor or Service Canada or ESDC. We talked about the owner-operator LMIA, and that's a very popular, well, it's marketed quite heavily right now around the world as a way to get immigration. And, you know, I have serious issues with that. First of all, there's a bit of a disjunct between the owner-operator LMIA that you get, which is an opinion by the Department of Labor that Canadians are not available. There's a disjunct between that, which is essentially saying that you're going to be self-employed. And then if the person gets the work permit on that basis and then switches gears and ends up getting someone else who takes over 51% of the company, and then they end up getting a T4 salary as opposed to an owner gets a dividend typically, then, you know, there's a bit of a contradiction there when they're applying for permanent residence, because the LMIA was issued in one sense and the work permit says one thing, but then the person's actually been doing another. So I think it's dangerous, and I would say that the government has confirmed that they have changed the way they process these applications. They're trying to make it a lot tougher to crack down on them, and you do have to have an active business to get one, which is a bit crazy. And you know, because how are you going to have an active business without, you know, having the work permit allowing you to work? So, but there are limited situations where that's possible, but it's still they are trying to just do just that. They're trying to make it very limited in terms of the folks that will apply for the, you know, that will qualify for this going forward. And you know, I just think that people have to be wary of it. And I think it, unfortunately, it's another example of immigration consultants around the world marketing it heavily and then having an impact on everyone else, legitimate people who otherwise would have qualified for it. Also from, I'll just say briefly, the department also confirmed that, you know, they're really trying to push the LMIA online, so their online form. And the advantage of doing it online is that it doesn't take the extra step for an officer to data entry the application, and it can be instantly pretty much assigned to an officer. So there is an advantage there. I also, you know, have the next topic. So I mean, I'll just stop there in terms of government updates. I could kind of go on and on, but those are sort of the rough updates. I'll have another update on CBSA after this afternoon. But in terms of ESDC, Service Canada, and IRCC, the Immigration Department, and the meeting with the minister and his office, that's the update. And again, I'll have an update on Minister Blair's office as of next week. Okay, so the next topic is work permits, restorations, and extensions. I mean, the good news is, and I complimented the minister in his office for some of these programs that they've implemented. I think they're wonderful programs. If you're in Canada as a visitor, so you could be on a super visa, business visa, you could be on a global skills work permit exempt visa, you can apply for a employer-specific work permit. You know, if you arrived, you know, before August 24th, 2020. So I think that's a great program. It avoids the whole need to go to the border and what we call flagpole to get your work permit. You know, we've used it many times. Also, if you've had a valid work permit in the past 12 months, you may request to begin working for a new employer before the work permit had actually even been approved. So you'll get some kind of confirmation that the application is submitted and you may begin work, but you don't have to wait for the work permit to be actually issued. So that's another good program. Also, restoration. Normally, when you lose your immigration status, you have 90 days to restore your status. They announced in July that the restoration period would be extended all the way to the end of this year, December 31st. So I think that's great. You know, that applies to those whose status expired only after January 30th, 2020. So I think those are some nice updates. I'll now turn it over to Halit, who will talk about express entry. And then also after that, the CRS points increase for Francophones.
Thanks, Ravi. So this morning we actually had a update with respect to express entry. We had another express entry draw, which was somewhat of a surprise draw because normally they're happening every 2 weeks, and this one happened a week after our most recent draw. So today's draw, we saw 5,000 invitations issued to candidates who had scores of 469 and up, which is a slight drop from the last round where we saw 5,000 invitations to candidates with scores of 472 and up. So today's draw and last week's draw were unique in the sense that they were two of the highest numbers of invitations that we've seen issued really since the express entry program started. In terms of, you know, we were seeing invitations hovering around 4,500 over the last month, around 3,500, 3,900 prior to that, and now we're up at 5,000 in the last 2 rounds. So, you know, it's good news in the sense that we are seeing the numbers increasing somewhat in terms of the use of this program. Some of the trends that we've been seeing in terms of express entry since the summer. So all of the recent express entry draws were general draws, whereas in the summer we were seeing more of the program-specific draws, targeting candidates under Canadian Experience Class, under provincial nominee programs, and we did a federal skilled trades draw as well over the summer. So the trend in the fall has been to move away from those program-specific draws more towards the general draws that we've been seeing in the last few rounds. In terms of the cutoff score, it's been fairly steady. The cutoff in the last few rounds has been around 469, 470, 471. And so typically when we're advising clients in terms of people who have scores below those cutoffs, we have to look at other ways of potentially increasing their scores, either through some of the provincial programs or job offers. And we
But Helene, isn't that because, I mean, they've been at the beginning when the pandemic first hit, like they were doing Canada Experience Class specific draws. And lately they've been moving away from that and doing just general draws.
Yeah.
But I think that there may be, the government's indicated to me, they may actually move towards doing specific program draws again, in which case, the numbers would drop, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, at this point, we can kind of only really be looking at the trends. Likely there will be program-specific draws again in the future, but in terms of timing and advising on timelines of when you might get an invitation, if you're below kind of the cutoffs we've seen in the general draws, that's still yet to be determined.
All right. Do you want to talk about the CRS points increase for Francophones?
Sure. So we also saw on October 20th, we had a ministerial announcement where the ministerial instructions were updated to increase the points that are awarded both for French language abilities and bilingual English-French language abilities. So the points have gone up for people who can obtain a CLB of 7 or higher in all 4 French language abilities. We've seen an increase from 15 to 25 points. And if you can also score at least a CLB 5 on the English test, along with a CLB 7 on your French test, we've seen an increase in points from 30 to 50 points under the express entry system. So the minister did announce that this is going to help the government to deliver on its commitment to reach a target of 4.4% French-speaking immigrant admissions outside of Quebec by 2023. And we'll have to see how that plays out in terms of French-speaking candidates.
Okay, so moving on, the next topic is the levels plan. So, on October 30th, the government released its immigration levels plan for 2021 to 2023, indicating that they want to welcome 401,000 next year, 411,000 in 2022, and 421,000 in 2023. So big numbers. Now, critics have been arguing that, look, I mean, you haven't been able to even bring in the people now whose approval have now expired, and there are lots of people that are you've basically approved in terms of the selection criteria, but you just haven't finalized their cases. So if you haven't been able to do that today, as of today, what makes why should we think that you're going to really bring in those kinds of numbers next year? And I think the answer is because the vaccine is around the corner. I think that they've been holding off on people who may not actually have jobs lined up in Canada, and they don't want to bring in a lot of people right now if they can avoid it. So if it's an essential need, like critical infrastructure, or doctors or researchers fighting COVID-19 or dealing with food scarcity or reuniting family members, that's one thing. But if it's just bringing in new immigrants, I think that there just hasn't been, they didn't want to say it, but I just don't think that that's been the priority. And I don't think that will be until we get the vaccine. So, there's also, in terms of, let's see, there's one other thing I was going to say. Oh, yeah. So that's on the levels plan. And I think there was also some discussion about spousals and the parental lottery. I thought that was looped into this one, maybe not. Okay, so on the parental, I just wanted to say that it's a program where demand far outstrips supply. There's about 100,000 people that want it every year, about 20,000 spots. Our Canadian Bar Association submission of August 20th, 2019 talked about a weighted lottery, where if you've been trying multiple years, then you'll have a better chance than those who are just applying fresh. So the minister's office indicated that it would require a sort of a committing to a multi-level plan on that program to do that. So they're not sure if they're going to do that, but it's an idea that they're looking at. But they did want to say that, look, even in the midst of a pandemic, the program wasn't eliminated, the numbers weren't decreased. That's true. I mean, they waited until the very end of the year to sort of open it up again. And there's doing 10,000 this year and 30,000 next year. So overall, it'll work out to 20,000 a year again. But I think that's always a program they're loath politically to get rid of, because they feel that there's a lot of support in the different ethnic communities in Canada, a lot of voters who really want that program to exist. So anyway, so that's a little summary on the levels plan. I threw in a little bit on the parental sponsorships and grandparent sponsorships, because I think that is always of interest. But I'll turn it over to you now, Halit, for the new Hong Kong immigration plan.
Sure, and just before I get on to that, we're jumping a little bit ahead in the agenda, but I wanted to touch on the parental sponsorships as well. We did see that the program closed intake in terms of interest to sponsor forms on November 3rd. So we're now in the situation where all the sponsors who have submitted the interest to sponsor form are waiting to get that, or to see if they're going to get an invitation to apply to sponsor their parents. And the government has indicated that 10,000 sponsors will be randomly invited this year, after which they'll have 60 days to submit the application. So, given that we're now end of November, likely, many of those applications will be filed in 2021. The other thing that the government did in terms of the parental sponsorship program this year was to recognize that the pandemic has had a financial impact on many sponsors, and they've reduced the minimum necessary income requirement for sponsors for the 2020 tax year, so that instead of having the MNI plus 30% in terms of income, they're just looking at the minimum necessary income for the household. So if you are lucky and you get an invitation to submit an application to sponsor your parents, that's one thing to keep in mind in terms of the 2020 income requirement. And then of course next year, the goal is to reopen the intake process for interest to sponsor forms, with the goal of accepting 30,000 applications next year. So that obviously, in terms of the levels plan, we'll see how that manages to play out. I'll move on to the Hong Kong immigration plan, which was recently announced November 12th. So this is going to be a new immigration initiative to expedite temporary documents in terms of work, study, permits for eligible Hong Kong youth and students, and also a plan to facilitate immigration for Hong Kong residents. So in terms of immigration, there are two new pathways that will become available in 2021. One pathway is targeting Hong Kong residents who have a year plus of authorized work experience in Canada. And there will be some minimum language and education requirements on there as well, but details have not yet been released. And then the other stream will be to target Hong Kong residents who've graduated from a post-secondary institution in Canada. And there's indications that will be a stream where these individuals can apply directly for permanent residence. So those are two new things to look for in 2021. And then on the temp side, there will be priority processing for Hong Kong residents who've applied for a visitor visa, work permit, study permit, family sponsorships, PR travel documents, Canadian passports, and electronic travel authorizations. So anybody who's already applied for those things should be receiving correspondence from immigration. They've given a date by February 26th, 2021. So if you have applied and you're a Hong Kong resident, you'll want to look out for that date to make sure you've received some correspondence by then.
Okay, and the landing process.
Yeah.
Talk about that one?
Sure. So in terms of the landing process, so because of the travel restrictions that are in place, we need to keep those in mind when we're looking at the processes that have been implemented. And the landing processes have been different in terms of applicants who are already in Canada versus applicants outside of Canada. So we'll start off just talking about the in-Canada applicants, where we've seen this new e-landing process, where essentially immigration has been sending out emails saying, congratulations, you're now a permanent resident. And these emails really made it easy for applicants who were in Canada, but did create an issue for applicants who maybe had traveled overseas and then happened to be outside of Canada when this email was issued. Applicants in that situation obviously had an issue of, if they want to return to Canada, they have to wait for the PR card to be issued. And with the current processing times that we've seen of 125 days, 145 days on PR cards, that created an issue for some applicants who were outside. So immigration's now indicated that they will be moving towards a new system for landing, which will involve a PR confirmation portal system. And when immigration is ready to finalize those applications, they will be asking applicants to go into the portal, confirm that they're currently in Canada, confirm the Canadian address where they will want the PR card to be sent to, and submit their final photo for the PR card through that portal. And then the confirmation of permanent residence documents, once they are issued, will be issued through the portal. So we're going to start to see use of this system probably over the next few weeks.
And I mean, don't forget, I mean, if you have a confirmation of permanent resident with residence, which is like the final approval, normally if it's after March 18, you can't come.
Right.
But if you're coming from the States, you can come. So it's just so people should keep in mind, because sometimes people forget that there is that US option. Okay, so I think what we'll do now is just turn to some questions. I see that there was a question about whether someone can enter Canada if they're exhibiting symptoms. I mean, I'd say, look, if you know you're sick and you have COVID, I would say don't come. But in terms of the law, the Order in Council states that if you're symptomatic, that you must isolate yourselves without delay in accordance with instructions provided by the screening officer or quarantine officer, and then remain in isolation for 14 days. And then during that time, undergo any health assessments that the quarantine officer requires, monitor your signs and symptoms, and report to public health as required, okay? And if, by the way, you're coming in and you're symptomatic and you're not able to isolate yourself, and you want to take public transportation to get to where you want to be, they're not satisfied that you're going to really be alone. You say you want to, you're going to be hanging out with your grandma and blah, blah, blah. Then, believe it or not, they can ship you away to a facility. So I'd say in terms of that question, maybe reach out to us and we can guide you further on that. The next question, any updates on government plans to provide more options to current temporary residents for PR? I mean, I guess I can take that one too, because, and I know there's more coming in, Halit, but yeah. On that, I think because the levels plan is so large, there could be opportunities there. But I mean, keep in mind that there are people that would have qualified for the Canada Experience class, but are short because they're just not working right now because of COVID. So there's also talk about, what about that group? Maybe they have 10 months of work experience or 2 months shy. What's the government going to do about them? Are they just, they came here, they paid expensive foreign tuition fees, they studied, they had a good job, they just, are short. And I don't think the answer, I don't think the government's going to really provide a solution to those people. I think that, they have typically a 3-year work permit. So they may just assume that they'll take the vaccine and get back to work, get rehired. So I wouldn't hold my breath on those. Keep in mind there's 600,000 or 700,000 people that come in to study every year in Canada, typically, and it's a $22 billion industry. And there's simply, even with 401,000 people next year, not all of those are going to be for the Canada Experience class and students who are now working. So I just think that I'd be shocked if they just said, okay, we're going to forgive the fact that you don't have the 12 months of required work experience. So I think for those who are, in Canada and are temporary residents, that's a broad category. I mean, I'd say, if you're working, maybe you're not going to make it, this year, but maybe there'll be a targeted CEC draw like we talked about, and then maybe you'll be okay after year 2, or maybe we can look at a provincial nominee program, or maybe there's a relationship there, a common law partner or a serious relationship that's going to turn into a marriage with a Canadian or permanent resident. So there's lots of, our job is to sort of really act like reporters and really issue spot. That's what we're trained to do, and think of the different options that maybe you're not even thinking of, and maybe hasn't occurred to you. So, so do reach out for consultations. Halid, I'll let you take the next question.
Okay, so in terms of regarding the quarantine period, what are the odds that the Calgary pilot project will be successful enough to be implemented throughout the rest of Canada? I think that's the hope, is that it will be implemented, but it's yet to be seen.
Well, in fact, there's the success rate was pretty much 99%. Of the 1% that so far anyway that were tested positive for COVID, I think only a third of those were discovered after the second test. So when it's one thing if it's in Calgary, but if it's in Toronto and you're talking millions of people, flying in, it's going to be that 1/3 of 1% actually becomes significant, especially if the person's a super spreader. So they're looking at it carefully, but I think so far so good is the sense that I have. But again, we've got this vaccine now. Are they really going to? I guess it just depends on the rollout and how far they want to go to really jumpstart the sort of travel industry and save the airlines and all that kind of stuff before we have a vaccine. So I think they're going to be weighing all that right now. But I think
they're looking
yeah.
also at multiple levels. So in terms of Calgary, you're looking at a second test. When the vaccine rolls out, things will be changing again. So I think it's evolving over time for sure.
So the new portal landing process, when will be launched? I'm already seeing cases. I think, Halid, you're seeing them too, right?
Yeah. So they're already starting to send out notifications with the new portal process.
So what do you do if you are waiting for your PR card, having submitted new photos, prior ones inadequate, if the time frame 100 days is not met for expiry? Well, this 180 days thing, my sense is that, if there's a COVID-related delay, it's not going to affect you. The government's been pretty clear about that across all their lines of business, as they call it. So I wouldn't sweat that. What's your thought, Halid?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it if it can't be met. They've been pretty facilitative in terms of, when they can't be met.
Okay, well, I guess those are all the questions. So again, feel free to reach out to us. I always prefer direct email. And my email, Halid, you can give yours, but my email is my first name and the first letter of my last name. So Ravij, R-A-V-I-J @gans.com. And that's the most direct way to reach me. If you're looking for a consultation with me, personally, then that's the way to do it. And Halid, if they want to reach out to you, how do they reach you?
Yeah, if they want to reach out to me, same thing. Email is the most direct way, and my email address is same as as Ravi's first name followed by the initial of my last name, so HILETES, and @GAN.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I would like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar, and then also special thanks to Ravi and Lee, obviously, for sharing their expert knowledge. Really, really appreciate it. And just to let everyone know that I will be sending a recording, and along with some contact information as well about the panelists within 24 hours, so anyone will be able to reach out. And then I would also like to encourage everyone to sign up to our alerts and follow us on social media too, just to make sure that you're kept up to date with the latest developments inside Canadian immigration. Until next time, everybody, stay safe.